Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our Talks with Walt, as we are calling our reading through the deathbed edition of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. We are in the Calamus section and we turn to this amazing little poem called The Terrible Doubt of Appearances. Now, there are some who feel uncomfortable calling Whitman a transcendentalist, or part of that transcendentalist movement of especially Emerson and Thoreau. But we have said in 303 for a long time that truly the transcendentalists that maybe have the most influence today, beyond even Emerson and Thoreau, are Whitman and Emily Dickinson. And a little poem like this kind of proves what it is that we're saying. Now, my assumption here is that you've been working with our earlier stuff, especially like a poem like Eidolons, where I talked about Plato and the theory of the forms. So you want to go back and look at all of that stuff at learnstrong.net. Find that down the left-hand side, that Talks with Walt folder, and there you'll see everything from our inscriptions all the way through Song of Myself. Of course, a lot of philosophy we pointed out there, especially the idea of our big five: epistemology, what you can know; ontology, who you are; psychology and sociology, the study of the individual mind and motivations of the group, and of course their motivations; and then finally the question of theodicy. Why is it that terrible things have to happen? I'm going to make the argument that a little poem like this will actually address all of those issues for Whitman, making this a remarkably little philosophic offering for us. Now, the background information, as we always like to return to our Nortons, will tell us this way. For this idea of appearances, compare, Norton says, with lines 32 to 33 of Scented Herbage of My Breast, in which the real reality is contrasted with these shifting forms of life. Here, the same idea that only love confirms reality is developed into powerful form. We're going to obviously say this at 2A in a moment. This Calamus number 7 poem was given its present title in 1867. It's interesting, we're going to point this out when we read this, that in his 1860 revisions, Whitman actually deleted the syntactically involved line 9 and then decided to let it stand, so that when we meet that set of lines, we're obviously going to pay attention to it. Let's just enjoy the poem. And again, notice the times in Leaves of Grass where a preposition will be the beginning of the poem. Again, this whole notion of place and setting things in certain kinds of places and then orienting differently from what one would assume, all very powerful. Of the terrible doubt of appearances, of the uncertainty, after all, that we may be deluded, that may be reliance and hope, or but speculations after all, that may be identity beyond the grave is a beautiful fable only, may be the things I perceive, the animals, plants, men, hills, shining and flowing waters, the skies of day and night, colors, destinies, forms, may be these are, as doubtless they are, only apparitions, and the real something has yet to be known. How often they dart out of themselves as if to confound me and mock me. How often I think neither I know, nor any man knows aught of them. Maybe, seeming to me what they are, as doubtless they indeed but seem, is from my present point of view, and might prove, as of course they would, not of what they appear, or not anyhow from entirely changed points of view. To me these, and the likes of these, are curiously answered by my lovers, my dear friends. When he whom I love travels with me, or sits a long while holding me by the hand, when the subtle air, the impalpable, the sense that words and reason hold not, surround us and pervade us, then I am charged with untold and untellable wisdom. I'm silent. I require nothing further. I cannot answer the question of appearances or that of identity beyond the grave. But I walk or sit indifferent. I am satisfied. He, a hold of my hand, has completely satisfied me. Now, as we said from the very beginning in our study, there are poems in Leaves of Grass that it's almost as if you know that one poem, that's all you need from Leaves of Grass in your study. Of course, those of us that love these poems will say that's almost true of every single poem. Here I disagree with the critic Bloom, who says there's only a handful of great poems in Leaves of Grass and the rest are garbage, or something akin to it, lesser poems. I'm not sure that that's true, and I think Whitman he loved little poems like this to kind of give us a glimpse, right, of what's going on. Let's take a look at it. Notice we'll begin really quickly with the idea of the terrible doubt of appearances. And here immediately we are with the Platonic reading, of course, the cave allegory, book 7 of the cave allegory, of Republic, and the idea that we're sitting chained in a cave looking at shadows on a wall, believing them to be real. Of course, this use of the word terrible, he'll use it with earth, my likeness. It's a wonderful adjective, right? The terrible doubt of appearances. He will, of course, see as central to his project. As we've said epistemologically, the fallible disposition. I think I'm right, but I could be wrong, and therefore doubt is central, right? As for appearances, we'll see this in Crossing Brooklyn Ferry in passage number 9. We'll hear this in terms of other poems as well, of the uncertainty, and in that phrase, after all. In other words, after all your studies, there's still uncertainty, that we may be deluded. There's your fallibilist position in terms of our big 5 epistemologically. That, notice this is a poem of maybes, at least 5 of them, and notice the spelling with the hyphen, may be, right? That may be reliance and hope are but speculations after all. In other words, Whitman is willing to accept the potentiality that all of our longings for answers may in fact just be speculations, right? Guesses in the dark, we might say. That maybe identity beyond the grave is a beautiful fable only. I mean, immediately we have to think about Song of Myself in passage 6, but we also have to think of Plato's Republic and book 10. We've given full lectures on this at learnstrong.net. Notice he continues, maybe the things I perceive, and notice we'll have almost 10 of these things, right, that are listed. Animals, plants, men, hills. I love that he throws hills in there, right? Shining and flowing waters, he obviously loved water. The skies of day and night, colors, densities, forms, all of these scientific terms as well. Maybe these are, and then notice the use of the parenthetic, which immediately makes us think about Emily Dickinson, for example. Notice the use of the parenthetic here as doubtless they are, right? In other words, these are doubtless as they are only apparitions. He loves this word, obviously learned it from his study of Shakespeare, especially something like Macbeth. Remember in Macbeth 4:1, when Macbeth goes to visit the witches, in fact, the prophecies are called apparitions by Shakespeare. And the real something has yet to be known. In other words, it may be the case that all the stuff we think we know is in fact only half-truths at best, and there's something else coming along the line. Obviously, subtly, what's he telling you? Keep reading Leaves of Grass. There's more coming. Notice again the parenthetic. How often they dart out of themselves as if to confound me and mock me with the exclamation point. We've got to go back to Eidolons at this point, right, to take a look at that poem again. How often I think neither I know, here we are again with the epistemological challenge, nor any man knows aught of them. In other words, it's an amazing thing to embrace the mystery of this world. Maybe, he says it one more time, seeming to me what they are. By the way, these lines are the ones that Whitman considered deleting, and then thankfully he saved them. They are, of course, syntactically a little bit complicated, but really in the end he's making the observation, just restating it. Maybe seeming to me what they are. And the minute we read the word seeming, we think, of course, of Hamlet's response to his mother in Hamlet Act 1, Scene 2. Nay, madams, not seems, but is. I have that within which passage show these but the trappings and the suits of woe. I think Hamlet is standing in large measure behind this poem. To be or not to be, that is the question. Maybe seeming to me what they are, as doubtless they indeed but seem, as from my present point of view, we're going to get the point of view 2 times in this line, and might prove, as of course they would, not of what they appear or not anyhow from entirely changed points of view. Now think about Swift's Gulliver's Travels. And in the first he's in the land, of course, of the little people, the Lilliputians. And then, of course, in the next we have the complete reversal where he's the little person and, of course, the giant people are there. What is Swift arguing, as we say in our lectures on Swift, in this regard? He's convincing us that everything is about your point of view. Where you begin is how you will end up. So pay attention to where you begin in terms of your point of view. Of course, challenging your original point of view is the fallibilist position. I think I'm right, but I could be wrong, right? Notice earlier how often they dart out of themselves as if to confound me. There's your psychology. And now we're going to get to our of the big 5, sociology. To me, he says, these and the like of these are, he loves this word. I told you guys, curiously, answered. Here's our theodicy, right? That is to say, why no longer ask, why did this happen? to me, but rather why did this happen for me? By my lovers, my dear friends, and there's your sociology. So notice, this is a brilliant poem of the Big Five, isn't it? I mean, it speaks so brilliantly to all of those 5 elements of the philosophic questions that all of us ask. We've all asked the question, how do we know what we know? And how are we sure? He says, I'll tell you what I am sure of. I'm sure of love, and I'm sure of this exchange of love with the one that I'm with. When he whom I love travels with me, we think of passage 46, right? I'll carry your pack, and then you'll carry my pack with me, or sits a long while holding me by the hand. Notice that in the last line here, it's going to be a hold. This idea of holding, this idea of being together, this idea of adhesiveness, as he'll call it through Calamus. When the subtle air, he loves this word subtle, right? The impalpable, the sense that words and reason hold not. Notice the irony of holding, the friend holding, will have a hold of. Well, think, of course, of those final lines as we've read so many times in our studies of Milton, and I think Paradise Lost is always standing behind so many of these lines. You'll remember that Adam and Eve will leave Eden holding hand in hand. Here we are. Hold not, surround us, and pervade us. Of course, this is the famous observation, right? The Zen-like cone of all the things a fish can know. The one thing a fish can never know about is water, and we think, of course, of Wallace's classic graduation speech in this regards because it made it so popular, as we've spoken about in 303. But this idea, there is this stuff that we know intuitively, but we're not aware always that we know about it. Consciousness comes to mind. He says, then, all of that is almost like a when-then construction. Then I'm charged. He loves this idea of the magnetism, right? With untold and untellable wisdom. Now the irony, of course, is that he's trying to tell us over and over again in Leaves of Grass what this wisdom is for him. And then he's brought to silence. I'm silent. Thinking, of course, of almost many of the church fathers, including St. Augustine, right? I require nothing further. This is enough. We've heard this before in Leaves of Grass. This is all I need when I'm being held by the one I love. I don't need answers to all of the other questions, which might explain why so many of the church fathers in the Christian tradition, St. Augustine, of course, comes to mind, would argue that the power of the idea that God is love. If you believe in love, you believe in God, Whitman is arguing, and that's all you need. That's all you need. He says, I can't answer the question of appearances. We're back again, of course, to our epistemology, or that of identity beyond the grave. That is to say, ontology. We immediately think about Plato's Phaedo and the argument for the immortality of the soul. Whitman, of course, he knows all of that. He just says, I don't need any of those arguments. I don't need to have all the questions answered about what happens after I die. But because of what? How does he finish? But I walk or sit indifferent. And this idea of indifference is almost the Taoist idea of hu wei, that notion that it's not a disregard, as we've said in our lectures on Taoism. It's not a disregard, but it's a clinging to the thing that truly matters. And to that degree, I don't care about all that other stuff, right? He says, I'm satisfied. This idea of satisfaction will take us to Song of Myself, of course, passage 47. Why should I wish to see God better than this day? I see something of God in my face in the glass and in the faces of men. And then he finishes, he, and then we go back to this holding, a hold of my hand has completely satisfied me. Notice the use of this word, satisfy, satisfaction. We, of course, think of the famous Rolling Stones song, I Can't Get No Satisfaction. And for Whitman, he says, if you are spending your life trying to find all the answers to all these philosophic questions, you are missing the point of what life is actually all about. To be with somebody you care about, that's what you'll be thinking about 5 seconds before you flatline. As we prepare, as we've said in other lectures, to whisper the words that all of us will whisper. The words are, oh my God. The question is the inflection in the voice. Our Scrooge story comes to mind immediately, right? Just begging for one more day once he realizes he's seen his own tombstone. Why? Because he has no one to love. He needs people in his life who will take care of him and he can take care of them. Well, obviously that's our 2A message, right? Love is the most real thing in the world. I love the repetition in 2B of may be, and I love how he spells it with M-A-Y and then the hyphen and B-E. Now at 3a, of course, we can think about all the stories of great lovers. The Iliad, of course, Achilles and Patroclus. Think about Fitzgerald's Great Gatsby as it relates to this. Proust's In Search of Lost Time comes to mind. Obviously, we mentioned Republic 7 and the shadows on the wall as being real or not real. I want to challenge you, though, to think about Matthew Arnold's classic that we love to teach in 303 Dover Beach. The sea of faith was once two at the full, and round earth surely like the folds of a bright little furrow. But now I only hear its long withdrawing melancholy roar. Think about your date. That poem is published in 1867, although scholars think that maybe as early as 1849, that Arnold was already constructing this idea. In other words, in changing times, when the sea of faith begins to withdraw, what is it that we have? All love, let us be true to one another, he says. That is to say, the only thing in the end that we've ever really got is love. And the exchange of that love, true love. Now, of course, at 3a, we have to mention our Emerson and Thoreau. Of course, this poem, obviously influenced by the lectures that Whitman heard and the essays that he read of Emerson. And we can't help but think about Walden. I mean, we've given full lectures on all those essays of Emerson and Thoreau's Walden. And of course, it makes sense to go back and kind of place this poem there, as Whitman will be playing the same game that, for example, Thoreau will play in Walden, as he kind of postulates the big five, as we will call them, right? Those philosophic questions. But in the end, for Thoreau, it's a tree, isn't it? It is something foundational that will explain what it is that all these questions are pointing towards. And of course, we have to say it in the end, the greatest of the transcendentalist thinkers, maybe the greatest poet of them all. If it's not Whitman, it's certainly Emily Dickinson. Finally, at 3b, well, how do you own a poem like this? Well, I think it makes sense to kind of go in two directions. First of all, how do you know what you know is real, right? And to what degree can it be understood and treated as real, or simply as appearances? And then finally, the real question I think Whitman would want us to ask, who is it in your life that proves the answer to all the curious questions? And yet when you're with that person or that group of people, everything seems to be answered for you. And there doesn't seem to be a lot of talk. It is, in the end, silence. And I think for Whitman, that's going to be a fun moment when you can finally get there. Thank you.